I'm going to be starting this off with a bit of a history lesson, mainly because I haven't stretched my research legs in a while, and the context always matters. Doubly so in the case of this week's subject. So sit back, relax, and if you're new here, subscribe. I do weekly game videos, and if that tickles your fancy, then you'll like it here. With that out of the way, let's begin. It's often said that adversity can bring out the best in us. And no group of people understand that more than the team at the Ukrainian-founded and Czech-based development studio, GSC Game World. For those of you who are in the dark, GSC Game World is a game development company that stands out in the annals of PC gaming history. They originally got their start in Kiev in 1995 under the leadership of Sergei Grigorovich. By 1996, they originally consisted of 15 people in a two-bedroom apartment, including Sergei himself, his younger brother Yevgeny, and Andrew Pokarov, one of the eventual founders of 4A Games, the developers behind the Metro series. As time went on, they eventually released Cossacks European Wars in April of 2001, which had a release as recent as 2016. After a company-wide trip to the Chernobyl exclusionary zone in 2002, they decided to make a game set there. This is where Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl is born. I never played it, but I was interested because of its setting, which is an alternate version of the Chernobyl exclusion zone that had a second disaster take place in 2006, due to the secretive nature of the experiments being conducted in the zone. The other is the mechanical mix of Stalker being a first-person shooter, immersive sim, and survival horror game all in one. It was a modest sales success back in the day, but it gained a die-hard following that persists to this day. Capitalizing on this and fighting through financial troubles, GSC made two expansions for Shadow of Chernobyl called Clear Sky and Call of Pripyat, which continued the story and expanded on the gameplay. From 2009, work was beginning to ramp up on a sequel when GSC closed its doors in 2011. And under normal circumstances, this would be the end of the story. But no, it isn't. Because in December of 2014, GSC Game World reopened and proclaimed that it still owned the rights to the Stalker series. Which, if that's not a Christmas miracle, then I don't know what is. And in the following 10 years, Stalker passed into legend. GSC released a third Cossacks game, then re-released Shadow of Chernobyl, Clear Sky, and Call of Pripyat onto consoles, followed by the announcement of Stalker 2 in 2018, having restarted development on Unreal Engine 5 for the PC platform and the Xbox Series consoles at E3 2001. By all means, a happy ending, right? It keeps going. Its initial release of December 8, 2022 was delayed. First for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, forcing the development and release to be paused indefinitely, and then being restarted for finishing up polish a year later, following a move to Prague in the Czech Republic. Even after all of that, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl released on November 20th, 2024, which was 10 days ago when this goes out. Between financial hardships, studio closures, studio reopenings, having to relocate to a neighboring country because your home becomes a war zone overnight. The fact that Stalker 2 exists at all, let alone doing what it does, is a miracle. With all that done, I feel like we've established the context and groundwork to really talk about what this game does well in my time with it. So here's how my first 10 hours in the zone went. Stalker 2 goes as such. You play as Skiff, an independent stalker who was hired to scan anomalies in the zone after a mysterious artifact crashed into his apartment. After getting jumped by some paramilitary types near a prison, Skiff finds himself embroiled in all of the factional power plays and general weirdness of the zone. The early hours of the narrative are slow. There's no way around that. It's all built around introducing the various factions and characters as pieces on a chessboard. You've got the Ward, the aforementioned paramilitary you encounter early on, and the various independent stalkers. And these are all fine and good. While the story did start to pick up, I immediately found that the setting is the star of the show. The zone is weird. Really goddamn weird. It's irradiated, there are anomalies of various radioactive flavors, and everything is trying to kill you. And this makes sense. The original Stalker trilogy and this game, to an extent, are inspired by both the Russian science fiction novel Roadside Picnic and the 70s sci-fi film appropriately named Stalker. They focused on heavily irradiated areas that were cut off from the rest of the world and all of the resulting things that come from that. There were entire times when I walked through stretches of fields or underground bunkers where there was just eerie silence, and it was unnerving as shit. and these periods were broken up by explosive bouts of violence or entering an anomaly zone that basically broke the rules of reality. It's all in service of making you feel incredibly uneasy, and it's so good. It reminds me of the stretches of the African wilderness in Far Cry 2, aka the last time Far Cry was interesting to me. Not since those days when I played through the game in the winter holiday of 2008 had I felt this overwhelming sense of oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god. I now have that back. And it led to some interesting emergent stories of how I tensely snuck past enemies in firefights, and how some would get jumped by mutants and then I'd mop up the stragglers. It's so good. The vibes are immaculate, as the kids say. The mechanics, though, we need to lock in for that. Before I talk about gameplay, I need to discuss the concept of Eurojank. Eurojank, as I've taken to describing it, is a game from Eastern Europe that has ambitions that outstrip its budget and technology, while its systems introduce some mechanical friction. The preeminent examples of this include the Gothic series, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, and the original Witcher. Although that more so borders on Slavjank, which is Eurojank taken to the logical extreme. I bring this up because Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl is some Eurojank-ass Eurojank, and I am into it. Specifically because I am into Eurojank every now and then for a well-rounded diet. The gameplay mechanics are this interesting mix of first-person shooter, immersive sim, and survival horror game all rolled into one. I decided to play Stalker 2 on Rookie because I never played any of these games before and wanted to see what the vibe was like. The difficulty kind of felt like what a Resident Evil game is like when set to easy. You get showered with resources and enemies are a little less durable, and that's it. The main difference here is that when out doing things in the zone is the aforementioned everyone's trying to kill you philosophy. You've got other stalkers, bandits, scavengers, killers, and lowlives of all creeds trying to make a name for themselves. And this is before you get into the mutants. Yep, that's right, I said mutants. As in heavily irradiated killing machine mutants. As in mutants that probably have psychic powers. Those kind of mutants. And they're all terrifying. In the case of the mutants, however, that terror is slightly offset by virtue of the enemy AI not being very smart. Meaning you can just kite them down a hallway and then unload on them. But humans are a different story. The law of the zone is shoot first, loot the body, don't ask questions ever. Human enemies will do everything in their power to kill you dead. But there are ways around this, chief among them being stowing your weapons. The main purpose of this is to make it so that guards and other stalkers in settlements don't shoot you on the spot, but you can use it when out in the field to make yourself seem like less of a threat. So I just use it to sneak around and avoid any fights that I didn't want to take. In the event that you actually do want to or have to fight, the shooting is serviceable. Skiff knows his way around a gun, but he's not lightning responsive in the same way a boomer shooter protagonist would be. You gotta line up your shots and make absolutely sure that you want to take the fights you want to take. The best example is when doing the final main story mission in the Lesser Zone, where I found myself inside of a military base and effectively had to shoot my way out. It was harrowing. I was taking pot shots, throwing grenades, taking spare ammo off the ground for extra shots. I loved it. And the zone itself is also trying to kill you. There are anomalies all over the place that are basically damaging traps, but you can get around it by just tossing a bolt in there. You also got a flashlight and a tracker thing that detects anomalies, and you need those because it gets dark and weird outside. You also have to contend with hunger, dehydration, and radiation sickness, and while these all apply friction, they apply an interesting friction. It leads to you doing jobs with the various denizens of the hub areas to get more currency to buy more supplies, be it bullets, foodstuffs, water, or medicine. And these extra missions often have different solutions and even endings. It leads you into this nice rhythm of scavenging, taking jobs, upgrading your equipment, and advancing the story. And while the main story is only just getting started by the time I stopped playing, this core loop felt so satisfying that I feel like it can carry the entirety of Stalker 2. It's that good. I just wish it ran better, though. Stalker 2 is a very technically demanding video game. I'm running it on hardware that's, to put it modestly, kinda out of date. And while my machine has shown itself to be remarkably future-proof so far, I can consistently run stuff like Space Marine 2 without much issue. Stalker 2 gave me some problems. I've been getting frame drops into the single digits, my CPU sometimes feels like it's going into the red, and thankfully I've only had one crash so far. I'm still paranoid about the crashing, but a lot of the problems I fixed by just bumping everything down to medium settings. It's also got DLSS, so that could be a thing to futz with in the future. I bring this tech stuff up because it's the one unfortunate downside to a very interesting experience so far. But considering that Stalker 2 sold over 1 million copies in 2 days, I'm assuming enough people are willing to accept it. Which, in context of all the stuff I mentioned earlier, I understand. Game development is hard and patches are already being worked on. This kind of brings me back to the vibes I mentioned. The air is thick with tension, and there are times when the stars align and the zone looks absolutely gorgeous. Like when the emission storms that you need to shelter from pop up. They look like a thunderstorm got married and had kids with an oblivion gate. You see the goddamn lightning striking the ground and everybody dropping everything to get to shelter, and it's amazingly wild. I also appreciate that this game looks and sounds Slavic as fuck, which is obvious because it was developed by Ukrainians, but everything from the way the buildings look to the way ruins are splayed out, combined with what feels like a near permanent air of Eastern European dread. It's weirdly comforting at this time of year. And you could tell that even though it still feels like Eurojank, that a lot of money was put into it. From what I understand, while Microsoft isn't publishing it, they certainly supported GSC throughout a lot of the development, so that might be it. And that is weirdly wholesome to hear. I like that. Stalker 2 is a game that, by all measures, should not exist. Between what can only be described as development hell of the highest order and the literal wars getting in the way, it should never have seen the light of day. But it did. And from what the early hours are like, it's shaping up to be something incredible. While there's still some technical uneasiness, if you see this as interesting, I recommend that you give this a chance, because even if there is friction from the various systems, it's well worth it because friction is where the sparks fly. And in all honesty, the colder winter months seem like an excellent time to take a trip to the zone. Podomotje, Shovel, Vyporoyece.